If you want to get early access to all of our daily videos, please consider joining our Patreon. I'll put a link below. Here it is on the screen. Again, you get early access to all the daily videos, ad-free, early, before anyone else gets to see them. Have at it. And you can help support the channel. Religious studies professor Diana Pasulka recently went on a podcast and spoke about something she's never publicly spoken about before. And at least that's the impression I got. You're going to have to tell me when you see the clip. Now, let's get to this interview. So today's clips are referring to Jake Barber, Skywatcher, and the idea of summoning craft, right? Or connecting with craft. There's many terms people are using psychically, right? The psionic assets, that whole thing, right? Telepathic communication with NHI, non-human intelligence, and their craft, right? And what Diana has to say about it, I have to admit, I agree with her. But she tells a very disturbing story about her time with Garry Nolan right before they went out to that secret crash site with Tim Taylor, who is referred to as Tyler D in her book, American Cosmic. If you don't know about that story, it's too much to get into here, but I did make a video about it. I'll put a link in the description about that particular trip, which is fascinating. But it's her comments about CE5, right? Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which is a term that kind of Stephen Greer has coined in a sense, and he gets brought up too. But her comments about, summoning craft, if you will, and making that connection is a warning, in my opinion. I want to tell you to stay tuned to the end because I have a correction for a video that I made yesterday also about Jake Barber that I want to make. So stay to the end for that. So let's get to this first clip where Diana just responds to Jake Barber's story in general.
He came forward in a pretty big way via News Nation, and he claimed he was part of, a UFO retrieval program. If folks haven't seen that yet, perhaps you're newer to the topic. He's had some incredible experiences. First then, what were your thoughts on Jake's story itself?
Okay, so this is all right. I'd like to start by talking about it generally, if that's okay with you. So that program is something that I'm not aware of that particular program, but I'm aware of that framework for accessing or driving ships, okay, craft, whatever you want to call it. Obviously, it's something that's been known because Stephen Greer, of course, has his CE5 protocols that he's been utilizing. And in the UFO community, generally, he's controversial with respect to that. But in the historical record, you do have people who, in fact, this is the reason why in 2012, aerospace engineers and people associated with the Space Force were interested in my work because in the historical record, the Catholic historical record, you do see instances where people have interface with things that we would call UAP. And not just that, but there are a lot of things that surround that ability, including a certain type of lifestyle, right? So certain things help that process.
So she doesn't know too much about Jake, but she understands the framework in which Jake Barber and his team at Skywatcher are using, right? Which is, again, this what they're calling psionic assets, this psionic ability, right? This connection, right? So we've established that. Now, let's get to where Diana starts talking just about that framework, right? Of making a connection to, right, these non-human intelligence. Let's just leave it at that basic framework because that's what she's going to respond to. And again, she's pretty much putting out a warning.
The general idea then that this group would use psionics or some kind of telepathy to summon a craft. If you talk about that generally, and you mentioned Stephen Greer, rightly to say controversial, but there's not a lot that isn't controversial in this UFO conversation, honestly.
Right. Yeah.
The idea that any group would summon a craft or be able to, can you talk on that concept? And is that dangerous in the same way that people say don't use a Ouija board because you don't know what you're summoning or you know what you're opening up?
Yeah, so there are a few things I can say about that. First off, when we call it a craft, I think that that's a general term that people use, but nobody really knows what it is. Okay, so of people that I've met who've talked about having access to looking at whatever this is, they are saying that there's nothing that looks like technology. There's nothing that looks like, this is where you turn this thing on. Okay, then that makes more sense than to understand that there's some type of human to object interface, right? Which is something that to me seems much more likely if you look at the history of this phenomena. When people have these experiences, just general people who don't want these experiences, say they just happen to be in this place at the right time, right moment, or if they don't want the experience, the wrong time, wrong moment. It seems that in 80% of the cases, they feel like there is some type of interface with it. I met a person who was a kid. Well, I met actually a lot of grown-up witnesses when they were, as grown-ups, but they talked about what happened to them as like 12 years old, 11 years old, 13, 14. And they've had these experiences with these things that we'll just call craft for, because that's what we're calling it. And they felt that it somehow hooked onto them or hooked into their consciousness, and they felt like they were they were communicating with it regardless of whether they wanted to or not.
All right, so this is where all right, so this next part is where it's going to get a little complicated, right? This is where Diana is, again, in my opinion, from what my interpretation is, she's going to reveal something she hadn't revealed before in connection to this, right? Something that made her so afraid of opening up that doorway to this connection, right? Because as she just stated, she was talking to people who felt like they were connected whether they wanted to or not.
I have met people who are very religious and live what we call the sequestered type of life, who are known people to have had these experiences with this. They do call it something like they're driving it. Okay, so they do say it's like a pilot situation. All right, so I have heard that. Now this is not to say that I believe it. Remember, I teach religious studies, which means that my method is agnostic. I neither believe nor disbelieve. I'm taking data in. Okay, that doesn't mean that I don't have my personal opinion about it.
Yeah.
Right now, it's something completely, when we're looking at it now, it's being presented to us as something that the military is involved with. And that's pretty interesting, right? Because the military would not recognize anything like that. The US military is what I'm talking about. They wouldn't recognize anything like that 5 years ago. Okay, so this is like, you're right, it's just happened. It's happened in 2025. So that's a little bit of the context of what I could say. Another thing I'd like to say is that, again, this was something that I mentioned in American Cosmic when I'm going out into the desert with, I'll call him Tyler D, because he hasn't said that I can call him his name yet. Okay, I know a lot of people talk about that person, but I respect that situation. Garry Nolan has come out as Garry Nolan. So I was there with Garry Nolan and Tyler D, and we're going out to see what Tyler D calls a crash retrieval, a place of crash retrieval. And what's interesting is that the night before, Garry shares some of his research with us, and he has his computer and he shows us photo after photo after photo of events, what I call contact events where people have interfaced with these craft. And these are, and by the way, I've never written this in any publication. I do academic publications, and I've never written that night I prayed. But in this case, I did, because it was so disturbing to see that there were things that appeared to be like burns and damage and things like that. And it looked like a dangerous activity. And I didn't know, I still was not, this is the beginning of the book, by the way. So I still was not a believer, but that definitely was pushing me in the direction of Garry is not making this up. Like, this is exactly what I'm seeing. These photographs, they're not made up, and they're from all over the world. So I can say that about this too. So no, I don't think a person should engage in this personally. That's my personal opinion.
All right, so let's see if I can sum this up. Basically, Diana is kind of alleging that this is, a real phenomena, which is why she gives the warning, right? She doesn't recommend people partake in this particular action of communicating with non-human intelligence, right? With this sort of thing, right? Because of some pictures she saw with Garry Nolan right before the night they went out into the desert for that, to that crash site, right? And like she said, she'd never publicized it before, or at least published it in one of her books, that she prayed that night before they went out because she thought, well, Gary's not showing me any BS. These are real injuries, right? These are real physical effects that can happen to you when you make that connection. And I totally understand her warning. In fact, I agree with it, and I brought it up on this channel multiple times. And my biggest point has been safety. No one can guarantee your safety making this. There are no safety protocols to put in place, period. For dealing with this unknown, there was quite literally nothing that could be done to ensure your safety, right? So it's just one of those things, oh yeah, anybody can do it, this and that, but they don't talk about that aspect, right? If it's a real thing, really think about it logistically, what you're doing. Think about it. You're opening your mind to an unknown entity, literally zero research, zero effort put in to try to understand what you're communicating with and what it could do to you. Now, I'm not here to harp on people that, participate in this particular action, right? CE5, psionic connection, whatever you want to call it. Teach their own. Everyone do what they want, but I'm not going to do it. And I agree with Diana and what she's saying, to be honest with you. Now, she's coming from the standpoint, she believes it's real. That's why she doesn't want to do it. But I'm not necessarily there, but I'm in the, if it is real, why would I do that? Right? You know what I mean? And I've honestly had this thought for a long, long time. In fact, since I started and I first heard about it, right? I've spoken about it on interviews. I brought this up multiple times. It's not something I want to invite myself mentally, right? Like I want to invite mentally into my brain this sort of connection. And, I've been shamed for it. I've been told, well, Patrick, you just can't let go of your ego. It's like, it has nothing to do with that. Again, tell me what safety protocols are in place. Zero. So I don't know, but other people are claiming to do it, all the merrier to them. But I take Diana's warning, I like it. I agree with what she's saying, right? And I think it's something to at least consider if you're thinking about it. So let me know what you guys think in the comments about this. Now let's get to this correction for a video that I made yesterday that I spoke about at the beginning of this video, right? Said stay till the end. So look, I try to get everything as close to accurate as I can, right? I'm not perfect, and it seems I may have misinterpreted something Danny Sheehan said in an interview that he did. Again, for a video I made, I'll put a link in the description so you can check that out. And the gist of it is basically that he brought up alien reproduction vehicles and Jake Barber and all of this, and I interpreted it that Jake Barber was, retrieving, because he was part of this crash retrieval, that he was retrieving alien reproduction vehicles. But I was reached out to by one of the people from the Skywatcher team, Fred Baker. I can't reveal our communication because he wanted to keep that private, and that's fine. And again, I'm actually trying to get Fred on from Skywatcher, and he did agree to do an interview later down the road when they start doing interviews, so that'll be really cool. But he just said, hey, take a look at the News Nation interview, right? And you may have misinterpreted that. I realize there's a lot going on, and it was really cool. He's really nice, really cordial, to be honest with you. And I just wanted to make a correction. I'm not saying one thing's real or not. That has nothing to do with it. It's just that's not what Jake said, right? So to be fair, and I found a clip from that interview to kind of explain a little bit more about that. So I still think a lot of it's left up to interpretation, but to just be fair, I'm going to play a clip here from that News Nation interview of Jake Barber talking about that particular aspect of what exactly they were retrieving.
So as a helicopter operator, we provide a number of services to a number of departments within the military industrial complex. And that includes the Department of the Interior as well as the DOI. The Department of the Interior has a number of other departments within it, and we worked mostly in those for our CONUS or within the continental United States. Those operations include things like firefighting, long haul, short haul, which is our external loads for helicopters, working for the BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, anything you could do to provide utility, anything that you could do with the utility of a helicopter, we were put to task on.
Now, at this stage, there was no indication of any anomalous phenomena at all.
No.
When did you first start becoming aware of strange objects in the sky during your work?
Well, a lot of the work we did was on what I call the range. And the range is a particular geographical area where the U.S. government and its private partners use to test all kinds of things, weapon systems and resilience to weapon systems of certain craft. And so you see a lot of exciting things. And I have to remind you that my particular role is very basic, security and transportation. It gets a little broad as you drill down, but I'm a security and transportation expert, and that's the service we broadly provided to the government and its partners.
So you start seeing at the range,
yes,
interesting objects.
Well, yeah, it's always interesting out there. It was a process for me getting to the point until we had our first experience with something that was obviously non-human in origin. But up until that time, there's lots of interesting things in the sky. I can tell you that our technology, and by our I mean anything that lies within the inventory of the United States government and its private partners, is pretty spectacular. There's some cool things. And from an observer standpoint on the ground, it's hard to tell exactly what's going on. Things come in and out of sight. Things disappear for a moment and reappear. Things seem to move very quickly. Things change color, they change shape. And a good reference for this is, I'm sure we've all seen these drone shows like that get put on at the Super Bowl halftime or other places. And those are pretty amazing to see, visually amazing. But we all know that's human tech and we accept it. But if you kind of think about that and think about perhaps what we might be doing privately, in the interest of national security, your imagination could fill in the blanks on what you might see on a test range that's being used by the U.S. government and its partners.
All right, so I hope this helps clear some things up about what Jake said. It has nothing to do whether believing his claims or not, but it's definitely important to get what his claims even are right. So if I made a mistake there, my apologies, and here's the correction for it. I'll put a link in the description to that full interview with Jake Barber if you want to hear more about it. And you know what, to be fair, like, there is hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of footage. These people put out 4-hour, 3-hour interviews, and then we're supposed to take it all in and understand every little detail. And it does become very hard to kind of keep things straight, to be honest with you, for anybody, right, kind of following this, even myself who's in this all the time. And again, it's not like I just follow Jake Barber and his claims. There's a bazillion people to cover, and it's just a lot. So my apologies for getting that wrong. I hope this helps correct the record. Again, that Jake Barber didn't necessarily only get alien reproduction vehicle, right? Like, there's a lot more to the story. So watch hopefully that clip helps dispel some things. If you want more context and information, go check out that full interview on News Nation. All right, y'all. We'll see you on the next one. Remember, every day's a gift, y'all. Peace.